Hey, this is Tom Webster, and this is Sounds Profitable for Wednesday, May 31st, 2023, the complicated role of AI in podcasting. There has been much concern over how podcasting will implement AI. Today, I'm going to break down the current landscape and look at some future symbiotic relationships. But first, this week on the Product Deep Dive, CEO Tony Simmons walks through the Sonnet Insights dashboard. See how Sonnet contextualizes, categorizes, and indexes everything to get an overview of content, enabling more informed sales decisions, and just being smart about things. Tune in now at soundsprofitable.com. Well, the Sounds Profitable team just returned from London, where we hosted a partner event on the eve of another very successful podcast show. It was a crazy, exhausting week of peopling for me, but I did manage to squirrel away a few notes about all of the breaking news of the week. One bit of news that broke was Spotify's Bill Simmons casually mentioning on his podcast that Spotify was working on AI technology to deep fake voices, just like his, to use in podcast advertising. According to Simmons, and I quote, "We're developing that stuff. There's going to be a way to use my voice for the ads. You have to obviously give the approval for the voice, but it opens up, from an advertising standpoint, all these different great possibilities," unquote. Now, I've seen some podcasters recoil in horror at this, and if it weren't bad enough that Skynet will take all of the writing jobs in the entertainment business, our voices and potentially our children are next. I've already written at length about what AI potentially means for those of us in the creative space. I think it's a force multiplier for talented people. I use it all the time to help organize my thoughts and distill ideas. It's the assistant I never had. Sounds Profitable also spent a year working with Veritone, specifically their voice product, to translate Bryan's voice and synthetically create a Spanish version of our Narrated Articles podcast, and that tech is even more advanced today. I think the best thing you can say about what we call AI is that it isn't really intelligent in the way that we are. It allows you to query existing data and get back normal sounding answers, but it's a predictive engine. It's not going to come up with anything new in its current state. But I am sympathetic to the concerns that podcasters and hosts and voice talent share about the growing role of AI. I first saw it working with the Audio Publishers Association on their annual audiobook listener research studies, which I was fortunate enough to direct for about 10 years. Even before ChatGPT and deepfakes became part of our common parlance, narrators have been concerned about AI voice tech taking their jobs as that tech continues to climb out of the uncanny valley towards widespread adoption. Proponents of using AI narrators point out that most books don't have audio versions because it makes zero economic sense to create them for books that aren't destined for bestseller lists or airport Hudson's tables. Creating an audio version of, say, a business book with low sales at the push of a button increases distribution possibilities and enables accessible versions of books that are otherwise not economically viable. AI will probably also not take the jobs of ace narrators like Scott Brick or R.C. Bray, Robin Miles, or Davina Porter, because those narrators have a built-in following and a brand based on their enviable talents. The industry is also seeing more celebrity narrations, full-cast productions with music, and of course the fascinating hybrid projects that people like Malcolm Gladwell have brought to the space. Still, technology, especially the internet, has been brutal to the middle class in almost every field over the past few decades, and spoken word audio will never be immune to that. If AI enables audio versions of content on the skinny end of the long tail and doesn't replace, at least without compensation, the work of the most successful voices on the fat end of the tail, it does threaten the middle class. Just as the internet demolished the middle layer of so many other businesses, from stockbrokers to travel agents to bank tellers, it's coming for podcasters and audiobook producers. The good news about AI, though, is that if you are a creative talent, this technology can enable you to offload the least creative aspects of your job so that you can focus on being the best, most uncopyable creator that you can be. And it's potentially excellent news for advertisers and advertising efficacy, and indeed the entire long tail of podcasting that is struggling to monetize at scale. Here's 3 potential ideas I had just off the top of my jet-lagged brain. Number 1, better programmatic ads. Buying host-read ads at scale is currently a logistical Donnybrook between sales and operations and writers and talent. It's why that we have reused broadcast radio creative in podcasting in the first place. It's an intractable problem for national advertisers like Geico or brands subject to additional regulation like financial services and healthcare. But if a host-read ad for one of these brands could appear on your show and many shows without all of that friction, just voiced in your voice, then maybe you could start getting some of that sweet, sweet Geico money without taking the gecko. Now, why would you give up this kind of control, you might ask? Well, some would and some wouldn't. But wouldn't it be nice to have the option to get those kinds of programmatic buys on your podcast where currently brand safety and brand suitability concerns are just taking your show off the table? Now, I bet many would consider this a fair trade. And besides, host-read ads, even if they are, with your permission, AI-generated, they're more effective. We saw this in Sounds Profitable's 2022 study after these messages. More effective equals more sales, equals more repeat buys, equals a car payment. Today, companies like Decibel and AdTonos and Mopod are already using AI to craft advertising collateral, and there's much more to come. Number 2, creating local jobs and community services. Do you know what the internet did kill? Local news. Unless you live in a major market, you don't have a local newspaper doing local journalism. And you don't have a local radio station originating local news. You have syndicated content. As economies of scale hit local TV, radio, and newspapers, it simply became cost prohibitive in mid to small markets to effectively cover those markets from a broadcast perspective. Even in large markets, the startup and run costs of local news are just too much to bear. I consulted a radio station in Dubai for over a decade, and every single year, their market research came back that the residents of Dubai were crying out for a local news and information station. And every single year, that finding was rejected as cost prohibitive. But imagine that with a push of a button, a continuously updated, on-demand audio product could be generated in real time with local traffic and weather services, truly local sports coverage, and local journalism. We're starting to see things like this happen with companies like BG Ad Group in Georgia and their work with creating podcasts for local newspapers. But imagine if this became even more scalable and cost-effective. Of course, doing this for an AM station would require a huge cash outlay, but doing this with AI might be able to provide this offering where there hasn't been one for many years. That's good for the community. And it opens up jobs for local writers and local journalists to provide that content without the constraints and overhead of a printing press or a tower, and to have that content updated morning, noon, and night for habitual listening. The possibilities there are to create jobs and not take them, because many markets have already lost those jobs. And number 3, make the Bill Simmons podcast suck a little less. I have 2 admissions here. 1, I am a regular listener to Bill Simmons. His content is right in the sweet spot of my interests in sports and pop culture. And 2, I skip the pre-roll ads pretty much every time. There, I said it. But I don't skip them because I'm just one of those people who refuses to hear an ad. I listen to most ads. But I skip those ads because the creative for some of them is rarely refreshed. I have heard the exact same ad for ZipRecruiter and Simply Safe and any number of frequent advertisers for many months. And the quirky, delightful way that Bill Simmons reads those ads only makes the fact that they're never refreshed stand out even more. Now, I get it. It's a lot of work, not just on Bill, but on editors and producers to continually refresh those ads, especially for Simmons, who frequently guests on all of the podcasts in his Ringer network, which seemingly ranges from 4 to 100 appearances a week. It's simply not practical for him to refresh all of these ads all of the time. But if an AI, with training and permission and, of course, compensation, can do this, isn't this a win-win for everybody? Bill can focus on the show, the listener gets continually refreshed content, and the advertiser will surely get a better result, which means more buys. Now, I generated those 3 ideas in about 5 minutes, and you'll have more and better ones. But again, I'm not trying to be dismissive of the legitimate fear that AI is going to result in some people losing their jobs. It will. But in their place will be other, new, and different jobs as our workforce once again begins a great reallocation. We survived the steam engine this way. We survived the assembly line. We will survive this as well. I leave you today with the wise words of the great American poet Homer Simpson. You got to be pretty desperate to make it with a robot. Thanks again for listening to my article, The Complicated Role of AI in Podcasting. This episode was built using Spooler and hosted on Art19. I'm Tom Webster for Sounds Profitable. I'll see you next week.